Hey everybody, this is Chris Hecox here, Executive Director of the Jay and Susie Goose Performing Arts Center at Auburn University. Welcome to our July 16th, 2020 Talkback Thursday. We're thrilled to have Scott Crossfield from Theater Projects joining us today. Scott, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Chris. It's good to see you, and thank you again for inviting me. This is really special.
Absolutely. Great to see you too, virtually from Connecticut.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
It has. We're looking forward to having you back at Auburn soon
I can't wait.
to see a performance and everything. So glad to have you with us, and just wanted to give a few minutes to maybe introduce yourself, introduce Theater Projects, and so forth. So why don't you take it from there?
Great, absolutely. So I am Scott Crossfield. I am the Director of Design for Theater Projects. I work out of both our New York and our Connecticut offices. We also have offices in Denver. We have a representative in Santiago, Chile. And then we have a London office where we were originally founded. We have a Paris office, and we have a satellite in Shanghai as well. So we're a global company of theater designers that's been around for well over 60 years, probably built around 2,000 theaters. I've been with the company now for 14 plus years. Before that, I had my own firm in Manhattan for 10 years, and in some ways I couldn't beat them, so I joined them. It's really nice to be here. And we get to work on the most spectacular projects around the globe. We'll talk about some today, including the Goose Center, which is just gorgeous.
Great.
Yeah.
Yes, we think so too, and I know our patrons and the university are thrilled with the project. So thank you. So Scott, what exactly is a theater consultant?
Yeah.
What do you do?
So that is a question I get all the time. I get, what is a theater consultant and how did you get into theater consulting? So a theater consultant, basically, we help with the design of spaces for performance, right? And so in some ways, a theater consultant is a little bit of a misnomer because we design concert halls, opera houses, drama spaces, multi-use spaces, outdoor spaces, amphitheaters, but we also work in arenas, all those arena rock shows. That infrastructure has to be designed by someone, and stadiums. So basically what we do is we help owners, architects, create space to tell your stories and create space to share and come together, congregate in a very meaningful way. So, and our staff come from all walks of life in the performing arts. So they were stage managers, lighting designers, scenic designers, technical directors. We have folks who are architects, who studied architecture and design. So all walks of life coming together in a studio of highly creative people to help design performance spaces.
So how did you get into the business?
Yeah. So it was a girl, and I was probably about 10 years old, and it was actually a buddy of mine had a crush on a young girl who was playing the lead in Peter Pan. This was in a small town, Torrington, Connecticut. And I think you have some images that you can bring up, but in 1931, Thomas Lamb, one of America's most prolific theater architects, built this hall. That's the Warner Theater. It was part of the Warner Brothers chain. There was another in DC. There's one in Erie that is well known and still surviving. And this was my home. And I started working in this theater when I was 9 years old. It had been saved from the wrecking ball, and a community group saved it, but it had community theater, large-scale musicals. There's the Nutmeg Ballet right next door. I worked at the Nutmeg Ballet. I grew up in their studios. And basically, I lived in this theater and worked there doing any number of productions. It became a roadhouse, and you would have stars usually on their way down and out to some degree. So, Judy Collins, Arlo Guthrie in the later years, Three Dog Night, Oak Ridge Boys. And I just basically lived in the theater, slept in the theater. I think you even have an embarrassing photo of me from very early on. There we go. A little theater rat with my friend Pat. I had buck teeth, as you can see, so we were known as the Pat and Buck Show. And we worked on theater all around Connecticut. And that was it. Basically, I decided I wanted to study theater. I wanted to be a scenic designer when I was a kid. And I wanted to design scenery on Broadway. So I went to Carnegie Mellon University, and I studied scenic design amongst many things. And that was the recession of 1996. I got out of school, I had my degree, and there was no work. So luckily, my mother ran into a good friend, Andy Smith, who runs a consulting firm. And he said, wait, you don't have a job? Can you start Monday? And I said, of course I can start Monday. and I started drafting and doing blueprints on major performing arts centers, basically for one of my competitors now, as the lowest guy in the totem pole. And I show up on Monday morning, 9 a.m., and he rolls out the plans for New Jersey Performing Arts Center.
Oh, wow.
He says, we're going to NJPAC. We're going to start commissioning it. And I said, first thing, what is commissioning? And secondly, you can design theaters, right? It had never occurred to me that someone could design theaters. So I scrapped the idea of going to New York to be a scenic designer and never looked back. All I wanted to do is design theaters.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, things happen for a reason, right?
Yeah, and it's been an amazing journey. I'm coming up on 25 years now designing theaters.
Yeah, and some amazing spaces as well. So, Scott, how did you get connected to this project, to the Goose Center? So, when was that too? What year was it? Do you remember?
God, I'm thinking that was about 7-8 years ago now. So when I was working in Manhattan, I was working on a project with Wilson Butler Architects out of Boston, who are the architects for the Goose Center, and it was Towson University in Towson, Maryland. And the architect at the time was Jim Carroll with Design Collective. And we finished that project. It was an amazing project, right? A wonderful, this existing building. We created some new spaces. We carved a central atrium to make the building kind of understandable. And Wilson Butler did a fantastic job. And, project completes. I leave my firm in Manhattan. I join Theater Projects. Jim leaves to become the campus architect at Auburn. And I'm sitting in my living room one day by the phone with my feet up reading, and I get a call from Jim Carroll, right? I didn't know exactly where he was. And he said, Scott, we have this project down in Auburn, and it's a performing arts center, and I thought of you. Are you interested? I said, of course, yes, absolutely. Who wouldn't be interested? And he said, I have a question for you. I'm trying to build a team right now, and I would like you to be the theater consultant. There's this guy who grew up in Auburn. His name is Russ Todd. Have you heard of this guy? One of the premier performing arts acusticians in America. Yeah, I know Russ pretty well. And Chris, Russ and I are buddies. And he said, would he be good for our project? And I said, he'd be perfect for your project. So yeah, let's get on board and let's get to work and make something special in Auburn.
Yeah, that's great. And then, I came on board. I'm in my 4th year now. Came on board July 2017, but actually was working on the project a few months before that. Jim and I were meeting with you all and the other consultants and the WBA team as well, looking at, I think we were about 50% drawings at that time.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. But yeah, so wanted to talk a little bit, when that happened, there was, you all had a design. Obviously, the university had done a lot of research, bringing in AMS consulting to figure out what the usage was going to look like on campus in the community in the state of Alabama, all of those sort of things. But, we really started to look at really a lot of specifics, when I came on board and started meeting and looking at some of those theater designs. So, I'd like to, kind of inform everyone listening what that looks like, once you start getting, the occupants involved in the process and how things kind of change a little bit.
Well, yeah, so that's especially critical for us to have you on board, and we try to have you on board as early as possible.
Right.
As I said earlier, our team all worked in the theater. We worked in the arts. We've been in your shoes before, and that's what gives us the confidence to do what we do. AMS is in the same boat. The AMX folks, they operated venues. They know how to advise on that. But at the end of the day, we're not going to be the ones living in Auburn running the center.
Right.
And so I always say we can get you very far down the road. We can do a fantastic job of setting you up for success. But in many ways, it's like your home, designing a home, right? An architect can place the rooms in the right spot. They can get the big picture. But when it comes down to all the particulars about how you lay out a kitchen and where you put things and how you use your closets and the way you want to, it's your home. You need to manage it your way. And so we want to get you on board early enough where you can have an input and a say. And that comes from everything about, you may want to rearrange the offices differently because you have created a structure how you're going to staff the building.
Right.
We kind of had a pro forma, but it's not going to be exactly what you want.
Right.
Your team, like Tyler came on board and he said, I think I'm going to approach lighting a little differently and some of the equipment packages a little differently because he has that experience. And that's fantastic. That's what we want.
Right.
We want your input so it's tailored specifically for you.
Yeah. And, one of the big ones too, and I don't think people really understand, but from a design standpoint, from a theater consultant standpoint, from an acoustic standpoint, or just even the details on the seats that we have in the theater.
Yeah.
I mean, how close they are together, the materials, how quiet the mechanism is from an acoustical standpoint, the comfort level, and people have to sit down. And then even things that we're having to deal with now in, the COVID-19 era, is being able to, clean them using, certain products to make sure that they're safe when we're able to return to the theater and so forth. So, the seats are one of those really big ones that I think, everyone kind of has a hand in.
Yeah, the thing about seats that we tell people at the very beginning, the one thing your audience is going to touch the most is the seat. Right? Where they're going to spend the most time is the seat. So we spend an incredible amount of time, far more than I would have thought when I started my career.
Right.
And as you can imagine, I think Russ alluded to this on his talk last month, is the seats have an incredible acoustic components, right? And a large impact on the acoustics. Of course, also comfort, safety, code, right? Accessibility. So, the layout of the theater, and in particular, a lot of those things that you touch and you interact with, they're critically important. And that's some of the things that not just the big picture items, but, down to the smallest details where we really want to collaborate with you and your colleagues as well as the architect.
Right. So let's stay on seats a little bit too, because I think that one of the things that I always find interesting in designing a theater is the radius at which you have to put the seats in the theater to make sure that sight lines are good, and that we can fit the number of seats in the theater. One of the goals from very early on was to make sure that we had a 1,200 seat theater, which we have 1,204 seats in the theater. Talk a little bit about, because I think one of the things that we love about the Waltos Theater is the intimacy of the space, the sight lines, but also the fact that it feels like a small theater. It feels like an intimate theater, but we have a 1,200 seat theater.
Yeah, and maybe what we should do is switch to one of the pictures of the Waltos, and I'll describe it a little bit for the audience. So, perfect. So when we start designing a theater, right, we're going to start from the stage and we're going to work our way out. And what we're trying to create is a very intimate and enveloping room, a room that wraps and connects and brings our audience down to the performer and scales to the performer. And in this project, it was determined pretty early on that we had to meet a budget, and we had a good budget, but we had to be careful with the dollars. And we wanted to create an exceptional room. How do we marry that? We decided a one balcony room with a very tight envelopment. And if we could go to one more shot that swings around a little bit, we'll talk about some of that. Perfect. So as you can see, when you're standing on stage, this room kind of rings around and the energy from stage wraps right back around to the performer. We're always worried about the actor-audience relationship and equally the audience-audience relationship. So what we want to create is a dynamic, lively space, and intimate space that feels exceptionally small, right? But isn't technically small or physically small, because we have several things we have to do. We need the proper acoustic volume that Russ and his colleagues at Acoustic set. We have all of the code in ADA. We certainly have the technical requirements to transform the acoustics and do some of the other technical moves we're doing. And then we have the aesthetic, right, that Wilson Butler has overlaid this room to make it so beautiful. But as you can imagine, if I'm a performer out on stage, one solo performer standing center stage, and there's 1,200 people, the theater consultant's job is to allow that solo performer to reach out into that audience and grab them by the heartstrings, right? And really connect to an individual in the farthest reaches of the hall, like you're speaking to them directly. So some of the tricks, right, I see in the Waltos Theater, we have beautiful parallel sidewalls that Russ had alluded to that make a kind of a concert hall form for exceptional sounds. But then outside of that, we actually take the interior volume and we make it, it's not quite a perfect circle, but it's almost like a teardrop shape that focuses the energy back to the performer. And then we take the balcony, we wrap that balcony around tightly to the sides, and we start to step the audience down in those boxes. And while those boxes have a very small percentage of the audience, oftentimes the boxes in a multi-use hall like this may only have 5% of the audience. But what that does is take all those people in the parterre and the orchestra at the back of the hall, and it physically and therefore emotionally connects them to the performer. And on top of that, what we'll then overlay is basically we'll take the balcony fronts, the audience faces, that very intimate wrap, architectural lighting on the balcony front, and what we try to do is take the volume of a room, the physical volume, and cut it in half to make the emotional volume, that intimate space that connects it to the artist. And
because I think one of the things that is always difficult in some theaters is just how far away you feel.
Yes.
Even if it isn't the actual distance.
Yeah.
They're sometimes designed where you feel so far away. So, for example, in other theaters that I've worked in and been in, might have the same amount of seats, like a 1,200 seat theater or 1,500 seat theater or whatever, but it actually feels so much, bigger or further away from the audience, and you don't have that connection. So, I know one of the things that we had to communicate very early on during the construction phase when we were talking to donors and patrons and such about where to sit. Everybody, we had a lot of feedback of people, where should I sit? I want to be as close as possible. There were times that we were saying, listen, the second row might not be where you want to sit. You might want to be a little bit further because it's what people are used to. And then once they got into our theater and saw, oh my gosh, I could sit in, the back section of the balcony and feel just as close and maybe get that, the same sound. It's been really, it's absolutely amazing.
One of the things that theater designers try to do is create a lot of front rows, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
On the front row of the balcony, right? So those boxes, they're one row deep, right? We're trying to create that intimate embrace to the performer. So those are front rows. The balcony, of course, but your balcony is actually split. And you come in from the lobbies to a cross out and you can go up and down. Those elevated seats on the fourth row, right, of the balcony are kind of a front row.
Yeah.
If you're in the parterre, right, the parterre relationship and the parterre curve is actually a different curve than the orchestra seating curve, providing space for house mix and wheelchairs and other things, but that also creates more front first rows. So what you do is you create a lot of unique vantage points with excellent sight lines from a very variable locations, and that allows people to find their comfort zone and sit in a place in the theater that really feels good to them. We want to give those options.
Well, and it's true also too. If Jonathan pulls up the wide shot in the orchestra, we have a lot of different front rows, which you all designed so that the theater was very much a multi-use space. One of the things that I communicate to people about is, it was designed so that if we wanted to have a lecture and only sit people in the front and turn the lighting off in the balcony, it's going to feel intimate and not feel like you're one person in a 1,200 seat theater. You know what I mean? Exactly. And the same thing with, an intimate chamber music performance, a lecture or whatnot. I know there was a lot of conversation about that in the very early, and this is an image of the Renee Fleming Music in the Mind lecture that we had with AU faculty and Renee. Scott, can we spend a few minutes talking about that in the initial design phase as well?
Sure, absolutely. So every room we design, we make scalable.
Right.
Because you can never guarantee your full house every night. And you want to use it for multiple uses. You're going to have performance, you may have education, you may have lecture, you may have a TED talk, any number of things, right? So we need to be able to take the space, and sometimes what we say is cut the space in half. Meaning, right, with the 1,200 seater, we know from the get-go we can make a very comfortable 600 seat out of it just by the spatial relationships. And then we also want to say if there's 200 in the house or 300 to feel really good. So we break the space up into different sections, right? So you can imagine starting from the stage, you're going to have that initial orchestra section, and we put aisles in there. So you've got multiple banks within there
Right.
that you can seat. And then you've got the side boxes, and then that wraps to a parterre, also broken into sections. So that lower orchestra is now already in 8 different sections, right? And they
Right.
do with their own unique front rows and accessibility and access into the hall, which is wonderful. And then we do it again up in the balcony,
Right.
with individual boxes. So the idea is maybe you turn the balcony off, close it, just seat the orchestra. Maybe you just seat the orchestra without the parterre. And so you bring people closer and closer and closer. And then, of course, we've got the orchestra pit, right? And we can seat the orchestra pit, not seat the orchestra pit. And what that allows us to do is either bring the audience closer to the performer or bring the performer closer to the audience. So we've got flex zone where the house and the stage meet. That's just that critical sweet spot that we spend a lot of time on to get it right.
Yeah. And part of that too, when we were finalizing the plans and went into construction for the Goose Center, we were very fortunate to go ahead and add that second kind of modified second venue with the amphitheater space at the City of Auburn Lawn and Porch. Before I got involved in the project, I know that a number of individuals from the university and as well as you all and Russ and looked at a lot of different spaces. You want to talk a little bit about that and how that came about? And it's ever evolving. We're still working on closing the space in future years, but just wanted to have you speak to this a little bit.
No, absolutely. And I should point out that when we talk about the design of the Waltos Theater, we talk about the design of the second space, the building planning. I mean, that is all hand in hand with Wilson Butler Architects.
Absolutely, right.
With acoustics. So I wouldn't want to imply that it's just us. It's a team effort. But one of the projects that we brought to the table as a comparable is called the Cube at Virginia Tech, that we had opened not long before this project got into concept. And a trend we're seeing in performing arts centers at universities that have a heavy engineering and research component is basically a flexible space tied to the performing arts that can do so much more. And so the space of Virginia Tech, they call it the Cube, but it's basically an experimental space where they take groups from across campus or from industry and campus to do experiments that are sometimes arts related, sometimes engineering related, sometimes they are kind of scientific experiments. Actually, Jonathan, if you could go back one image, I want to talk about this performance. So what we were trying to do is create a space where people could come together and learn and grow as artists and to take the art form and try to expand the art form. So this is called the Minecraft Opera or Opera Craft. And so it is computer science majors and opera majors who came together to create an opera in the video game Minecraft.
That's awesome.
And it was stunning, and you can go on YouTube and you can watch it. It's really fun. But what was special for us as designers, because this achieved our original goal, is a lot of the computer science kids had never participated in or let alone heard an opera, and the opera singers had never done computer programming, right? And they still kind of didn't, but they got to spend time together, working together to understand each other's language. And that's part of what spaces like this are really designed for. And this space is a big erector set, not like yours, right? This kind of high-powered space where it's really, what we want is for you to never have to say no to someone. When they say, Chris, I've got the coolest idea that I want to do with Goose, right? I don't want you to have to say no. I want you to have to say, yeah, we're all about it. Bring it on. So, Jonathan, if you skip ahead to some of these, you'll just see they do a lot of augmented reality, virtual reality. This space was just featured last week in the New York Times. They were doing experiments on flying snakes, where they were trying to understand how snakes jump off of one tree and can perfectly land on a limb on another tree. And so basically they were tracking the snakes, and they use this space. Why is this space in a performing arts center versus an engineering building? Because when you're talking about creative people, you're talking about artistic collaborations, bringing together the arts and the sciences. That's what theater is. And that's what the performing arts have always been. Right? The best of what an artist can bring, the best of what a designer can bring, the best of what a technician, the best from operations and logistics and community outreach and development. And so it's a natural place to foster creativity, as they've always been. We're just creating spaces that allow that in a little bit more kind of scientific engineering way.
Yeah.
And so we've been doing a ton of work like this. And so that was one of the things about the Goose is Auburn has such a rich engineering history. It's the perfect school to have a creation space.
Absolutely. Well, we're working towards that. We were able to get it to the amphitheater space. I know Jonathan has some of those images from when we opened, and we're looking forward to being able to put more performances outside in the very near future. Here's some images of our first performance out there with Laney and Coyne, which we partnered with our University Programming Council at the university for over 2,000 students for a free concert. And we also had Molly Tuttle open for Jason Isbell as well. And that was an amazing performance with about 3,800 of our closest friends to celebrate the opening of this under a little bit of rain, but that didn't stop anybody. The show went on. But there's a great image of the space as it is right now.
Exactly. So you can imagine, right, taking this space and doing some of that amazing work that Virginia Tech does, and then now layering on all the amazing work you're already doing, being able to use it as an amphitheater and a venue, and combining those two, I think the sky's the limit. I'm really excited to see what you guys do.
We're excited to be working towards that in the not too distant future. But I know you guys are working, Scott, on a lot of projects. You always do. And I think one of the really interesting things about opening a building, this is the first building that I've been able to open, is this kind of fraternity and sorority that you kind of enter into as being someone that opened a building, and being able to pay it forward in helping out our colleagues that are doing the same thing. So, in the less than a year that we've been operating, myself and our staff have been contacted by a number of different individuals that are doing this all across the country, from different universities to nonprofit or city, state venues. I think it's been absolutely wonderful and very rewarding for us to be able to provide feedback and help those out, help those individuals and organizations out. So that's been, I think, one of the really cool things that's kind of come about from this. And it also happens because of the relationships that we have with you all as well. Having those people come and visit our space and hear a show or see the space. What did we enjoy about it? What would we do differently? What would we not do differently? So that's been fun. But maybe we could talk a little bit about some of the projects that you guys are working on right now, and some of the ones that we've actually been able to help out, to a very small extent.
Yeah. So we're working on the new Opera House in Nashville at Belmont University, which in many ways has a similar program to what you're talking about. This is with Earl Swenson Associates, ESA Architects out of Nashville, and they've been a delight to work with, and Russ Todd and his team at Acoustics. So same acoustician and theater consultant. 1,700 seats in this case, so it's got the additional balconies for the additional seating, but in many ways, true multi-purpose hall. A lot of what you see in the Waltos Theater, you're going to see here as well, in terms of the ability to accommodate the variety of performances that you can accommodate. We're also doing a renovation right now at the Palace Theater on 47th and Broadway, right by the TKTS booth.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So this is with PBDW Architects, Platt, Beyer, Double White. And here's the interesting thing about this. For the first time in American history, we're lifting up a Broadway theater. So, and that lift is supposed to happen this fall. But basically, we're taking the historic Palace, and if you know Broadway theaters, this is one of the storied, most important Broadway theaters. Absolutely. It's getting a complete restoration. But the first move is we're going to take the theater, and working with a very large and sophisticated team, part of the TSX project on Broadway. And folks should look it up. It's extremely cool. But we're going to lift up a Broadway theater almost 30 feet. And that's to allow several things. Part of it is to recapture the Broadway space that is so valuable. So there'll be some retail, there'll be some themed entertainment. There's a renovation of the hotel that sits above it. And then to provide dramatically improved lobby space, restroom space, public and performer amenities, and we're going to rebuild almost the entire stage house as well. So give Broadway a stage house. So
how many years will this project be in the works? Do you know?
I've been on it now for about 5, and I could easily see it taking maybe that many as well. It's hard to know. So it's a very sophisticated project because it has so many components and it's so layered. So, but it's a wonderful project. And then We've got a very cool one right now at Brown University. And Jonathan, I don't know if the video will run, but maybe some of the photos. But basically, for Brown, we're doing what's called a multi-form theater. So unlike a multi-use theater, multi-form. So one space that will transform from the experimental media like we saw. And Jonathan, you can just click right through these, right? Because they should go pretty quick, hopefully. So experimental media transforms into end stage, right? And then that will transform yet again into a large concert hall, largish, 600 seats, give or take, 600. And then that will transform yet again to a small recital and then to a flat floor space. So this is with architects out of New York called Rex. And we did the Wiley Theater in Dallas at the Dallas Theater Center with them.
Yep.
So basically you can imagine one room, and that room almost like a heartbeat. When we first sketched it out, the idea was that the room would grow and the room would shrink with the needs of the artists and with the creators inside of it. And so you do this concert hall to recital hall to proscenium theater to immersive environment space and back again. And the idea is we hope they will come up with something we never thought of, right? And it's this creative engine. So I when it opens, I hope to be completely surprised with something that even I couldn't think of because it's so creative and wonderful. But, you know, our job is to enable artists for future generations.
Yeah.
Our buildings last 50 to 100 years.
Yeah. Well, all the feedback that we've received from patrons and artists has been wonderful, from the work that WBA has put in to you all, to acoustics, to all the different consultants, to Rayburn General Contractors to actually execute the vision. Just want to say thanks, Scott, to you and your team for everything you've done. Again, we've had Scott Crossfield here from Theater Projects. Thanks, Scott.
It's absolutely
absolutely. Just want to remind everybody that tickets are on sale for the 2021 season. You can see below Scott and myself, goosecenter.tickets.auburn.edu. Our single tickets went on sale for the general public today. So box office is open. If you want to call 344-844-8497 or go to the website goosecenter.tickets.auburn.edu. So glad to have you here again, Scott. Looking forward to seeing you in person soon. Stay well, and stay well, everyone out there. And War Eagle to everyone.
All right, War Eagle.